What if Deku started training early? Part 2. Chapter 2, Getting into UA. Flashback to 7 months ago. About 5 hours after Izuku ingested the hair that All Might gave him, we find the duo on a secluded part of the beach out of sight from the public. Izuku looking down at his forearms, noticing the power of One for All starting to course through his body. It was like nothing he had experienced before. It was an overwhelming feeling of finally having a quirk. Not only does he have a quirk, but it belonged to his idol, the #1 hero who inspired him in the first place, All Might. While thinking of all the practice that he'll need to use his newfound power, Izuku was interrupted by the words of Toshinori. Earth to Midoriya. While waving a hand in his successor's face, All Might finally got the boy's attention. He then activated his quirk, transforming into his hero form. All Might then started stretching before facing the nearby ocean. Once he was limber, he looked down to the green-haired boy, then said, "Young Midoriya, it's time we test out your quirk to see how much of One for All you can handle." Enchanted by the #1 hero's words, he stood next to him, preparing himself for the next lesson. All Might then cocked his fist back, preparing to launch his attack. He then yelled out, "Detroit Smash!" The next thing you know, a tremendous storm of wind and air pressure divided the ocean's water in half for what seemed to be miles. Izuku, captivated from actually witnessing All Might using his quirk in person, remained speechless, still amazed at what he just saw. Inside, he couldn't believe that he's living out a dream that he fantasized about for so many years. "Okay, young man, let's see what you got." Being awakened from his daydreaming, Izuku responded, "Yes, sir." Without hesitating, the green-haired boy walked up to where All Might once stood. He then got into a similar stance, imitating the pro hero. He cocked his fist back, then paused for a moment before saying to All Might, "I'm All Might, how do I activate your quirk?" Toshinori then face-palmed, realizing that in all this time he never told the boy exactly what to do. He then picked himself back up before letting out a hearty laugh. "Ha ha ha. You just have to feel it, kid. Once you grab a hold of your power, then clench your butt cheeks and yell this from the top of your lungs. Smash!" Izuku, not being satisfied with that answer, looked at him yet again with a dumbfounded facial expression. The boy, not knowing what else to do, started to feel for his quirk, trying to bring out his inherited power. Once again, having the odd sensation of electricity coursing throughout his body, he started gathering power into his right arm. Red veins started forming along his arm, his muscles started bulging, and the power was crackling all over his right side. Izuku then readied himself, taking the exact same stance as his sensei. Looking over his shoulder at All Might, he saw him giving a thumbs up, signifying it was okay for him to release his attack. Following All Might's instructions, the boy then clenched his butt cheeks before yelling out, "Smash!" Thrusting his fist forward, releasing his first ever Detroit Smash, causing a similar but less controlled break in the ocean's waters. Nonetheless, All Might was thoroughly impressed by the results of the young man's first attempt of using One for All. Noticing that the boy was no longer standing in the same position, he looked and saw Izuku had been blown back, laying on the beach's sandy terrain. The hero then hurried to his side, noticing that the boy was grabbing his arm in pain. Looking to see the source of his cries, All Might then noticed the purple bruises that had formed on young Midoriya's right arm. All Might then said to the boy, "Young man, you've just experienced the backlash of using the full power of One for All without having full control." Izuku, still in pain but aware of his sensei's words, made a mental note to himself to not try that again without the proper practice of control. All Might then lifted the boy from the ground and carried him over to his truck. After placing the boy inside the vehicle, he deactivated his quirk, returning to his normal form. They then left in a hurry to get the boy some medical attention. After arriving at their destination, Izuku recognized that he was back in Matsudafu, but not familiar with the place he had been taken to. Toshinori pulled up to the gate and pushed the button on the call box next to it. A voice then sounded out of the speaker. "Hello, who is it?" The voice said shortly afterwards. All Might replied, "Shuzungi-chan, it's me, Toshinori. I have a patient that could use your help." The voice had then disappeared and the gate to the office had started to open. The two then pulled up to the large white office that was structured to look like a giant band-aid. After exiting the vehicle, Izuku followed All Might to the door in front of the building. As the pair walked up, the door opened, and they were greeted by the former pro hero Recovery Girl. All Might, expecting a warm welcome, was met with a cane to his head. What was that for? Recovery Girl then spoke. I told you to not overdo it anymore, and you show up here just weeks after we already had this same conversation. All Might, rubbing the spot where he was just struck, exclaimed to the nurse. Geez. I wasn't the one that got hurt this time. Being caught off guard by Toshinori's statement, Recovery Girl then noticed the green-haired young man standing behind her longtime friend with stars in his eyes. Izuku, who just realized who he was brought to, started fanning out before Recovery Girl could even speak. Wow. You're Recovery Girl, I've been a fan of yours for a long time. I can't believe I'm actually getting a chance to meet you, and I wanted to know if you could. Toshinori then slapped a hand over Izuku's mouth before the boy could continue. While still trying to speak, Toshinori sighed, then said, Man kid, you sure can go overboard with the word vomit. Now that Recovery Girl found out the reason for her visitors showing up, she asked for them to come in. After entering the office, Recovery Girl asked for Izuku to have a seat on the patient's table before inspecting the boy's injuries. She got a close look before telling him, My, it looks like you had a bad reaction to your own quirk. How did this happen? Izuku then looked over to All Might with a hint of worry plastered all over his face. The hero then spoke. He's my successor, Recovery Girl. She then looked back to the boy before sighing and saying, Oh, I see, so these were caused by One for All. Well, let's get this exam over with and you all healed up. Not too long after healing Midoriya's wounds, Izuku bowed to the nurse, thanking her for all the help and also the candy she gave him. Although he felt drained after being healed, Izuku was very happy to have gotten the autograph of one of his favorite pro heroes. Toshinori then thanked his friend before heading back to drop off his new student. After leaving from in front of the Midoriya's household, Izuku waved to All Might before heading inside to greet his mother. Later that night, Izuku remembered the last thing All Might said to him before getting out of his truck. He then looked down to the piece of paper All Might handed to him before he dropped him off. Meet me at this address tomorrow at 7 a.m. sharp. We have a lot of work to do, so don't be late. Overly excited about getting back to his training, Izuku then hurried to get prepared for the following day. It was a clear and sunny morning as Izuku finally arrived at the address given to him by his sensei. From a distance, it looked to be an abandoned airfield in the countryside far away from the city. Walking through the entrance, Izuku noticed the large tarmac next to an old airplane hangar that looked seemingly condemned. There were a bunch of old rusted cars, concrete dividers and piles of rubble everywhere. As he started approaching the hangar, he noticed All Might walking out of it carrying 6 large tractor tires. He had 3 on each of his shoulders, making it look very easy. The pro then caught eyes with the green-haired boy before yelling out, Welcome to my training ground, you newbie. Right before dropping the tires at his sides, causing the boy to almost stumble from the shake in the ground. Gaining his composure, then standing at attention, Izuku then waited for his next instructions from the number 1 hero. All Might then pointed his finger at the boy before saying, You still aren't ready to fully control One for All, so we're going to teach you how to control your power before the entrance exam. But before All Might could continue, Izuku cut him off. All Might, can I ask you something? After seeing the worry in his eyes, Toshinori then said, Of course, young Midoriya, what is it? Izuku then looked at his hands before responding to All Might. He then gazed back at him before asking, All Might, how does it feel when you activate your quirk? All Might then paused, grabbing his chin, and after a few seconds he answered the boy. When I summon One for All, the power courses throughout my body, which explains why I go into my muscle form whenever I'm using it. This cultivated power enhances all of my movements and actions, which allows me to save the day. Izuku, after taking in everything he just heard and watching All Might striking poses, he then suddenly screamed out, That's it. He then took a stance with his legs spread shoulder length apart while bracing his body. He started channeling One for All, but at a much less percentage than the day before. All Might, looking with curiosity, patiently waited to see what his successor was attempting to do. Izuku then started saying aloud, "Where I messed up at was trying to force 100% of my power just into one limb. What I should have been doing is channeling it throughout my entire body, that way the pressure of all that power isn't all focused into one point." Red veins started appearing all over Izuku's body, starting with his legs. They also were showing up on his arms until they covered his whole torso, including his head. The veins then faded, being replaced with green lightning surrounding his entire body. All Might, with a hint of pride in his eyes, looked over to the boy and asked, "How does it feel, young Midoriya?" The green-haired boy then started gazing all over his body, noticing the lightning sparking off of his skin and clothes before responding. "Yesterday the pressure of having all of that power gathered into my right arm felt like I was a teapot heating up without a steam hole. So, performing a Detroit Smash was the only way to relieve all that built-up pressure. Now that the pressure is much lower than before, I have better control over the power." All Might then asked, "How much of One for All would you say you can control at this point?" Izuku then closed his eyes for a few seconds like he was in thought before opening them and telling him, "It feels like 10% of my full power." All Might just smiled before activating his quirk and changing into his muscle form. The hero then started to stretch and got into a fighting stance. All Might then told his student, "While we're training, I want you to keep One for All activated at all times until I give you the go-ahead to stop. Your body isn't used to having my quirk, so by doing this it'll start getting used of the feeling of having One for All." With a determined grin on his face, the green-haired boy matched his teacher's fighting stance. Izuku started to focus on his opponent, preparing himself for what was coming next. All Might then dashed at the boy while yelling, "I'll match your power with 10% of my own until you get acclimated with it." The two then clashed fists, both of their right hands extended, causing a small tremor before they separated, and All Might spoke again. "Once you've mastered 10% of One for All, we'll steadily increase your power output until you have this quirk fully mastered." Izuku just responded, "Yes sir." He then started rushing towards All Might again, continuing their sparring lesson. 3 months later, All Might is standing idly by, monitoring his successor's progress as he does push-ups with 2 large tractor tires on his back. As a method of strengthening his situational awareness, All Might tossed a water bottle at the boy's head, but to his surprise Izuku had activated One for All and quickly extended his arm, grabbing the bottle out of the air. Turning to his side so the tires would drop, the green-haired boy stood up and walked over to his sensei while taking a drink of his bottle. After finishing the cool beverage, he said to him, "Not this time, All Might." Izuku then placed the empty bottle in the nearby trash can before stretching and taking his place next to All Might on the track. Once his muscles were loose enough, Toshinori looked to his successor and asked, "Young Midoriya, have you had any more of those dreams you told me about?" Izuku stopped his stretch, then looked over to All Might before answering, "No, I haven't had a dream like that since I finally reached mastery over 20% of One for All." The two then recollect the dream that the green-haired boy had and described to his sensei the following day. Izuku went on to tell All Might that he had a dream where he was trapped in a dark void being monitored by 8 silhouettes with glowing eyes. But what stood out of all of the images was the one that looked like All Might. Right before the dream had ended, one of the images started to change into the image of a young gray-haired man who pointed at me before saying, "The 9th." After that I woke up from the dream gasping for air, and I tried to put the pieces together before seeing All Might the next day. The two then got into a runner's position before taking off, jetting down the tarmac. Trailing behind All Might, the boy couldn't help but feel like he was going to lose their daily race yet again. Izuku then pushed to his current limit of One for All and tried everything he could to match his teacher's speed. All Might then looked back at the boy before saying, "I'm barely using 25%, come on slowpoke or you'll never beat me." Izuku, being fired up by the words of the pro hero and frustrated from all of his consecutive losses, pushed past his limit to 25%. Feeling the strain of the new power, Izuku felt the change in speed as his body propelled him even closer to his rival. All Might, noticing that his pursuer was catching up, then increased his power just a little bit more to keep his lead. Trying with everything he had, Izuku kept pushing himself towards All Might. He extended his hand out in the direction of the finish line. The boy just kept thinking to himself, I just need a little bit more power and I know I could beat him. Try as he may, Izuku just couldn't match the speed of the number one hero, but he was determined to not lose this time. Foregoing the safety measures given to him by All Might, Izuku increased the power of One for All to 30%, knowing that this would be the only way he'll be able to actually win this time. Starting to close the gap between the two of them, Izuku stuck his hand out towards the approaching goal. Giving it his all, trying everything to win. That's when an unfamiliar feeling suddenly pulsed throughout his body. The next thing you know, large black tendrils shot out of the boy's arms, covering the track and even All Might in the process. Fear and panic set in the horrified face of the fledgling hero. He tried his best to control the large black mass spewing out of his arm and throwing him everywhere. All Might, being utterly surprised by this, couldn't help but freeze at the sight. Seeing that his student needed help, he rushed into the center of the black mass. Grabbing a hold of the young boy, trying his best to defuse the situation, he then lifted the boy off of his feet and then yelled to Izuku. Young Midoriya, you have to stop this now. Izuku, being overpowered by the mass and struggling to stay on his feet, yelled out. It's not me, All Might, I don't know how to stop it. Come on, One for All, listen to me. But his body just wouldn't respond, and for some reason he couldn't get his quirk to deactivate. The pro hero, seeing no other way of stopping the boy's quirk, decided to take action the best way he could. All Might then said so the boy could hear. I'm sorry, young Midoriya, but I must end this before you hurt someone or yourself. All Might then raised one of his arms while keeping a hold of his prodigy with the other. He then called out, Texas Smash. The hero then proceeded to chop the boy on the back of his head, knocking him unconscious. This caused the quirk to slowly stop and retreat back into his body. A few hours later, Izuku woke up in the familiar office of Recovery Girl. Looking to his left, he saw All Might in the waiting area on the phone with a worried expression plastered all over his face. He then slowly looked over to his right due to the stiffness in his neck and the pain coming from his head. Once he was in full view, he saw Recovery Girl at his side. She then started to check him for signs of a concussion. While she was doing that, he noticed that his arm was bandaged up. After seeing that, he remembered the day's events and the dream he had right before he woke up. Once All Might noticed that his successor was finally awake, he entered the room before asking, How is he doing, Recovery Girl? She looked over to the hero before saying, He doesn't have a concussion, but he will have a few scars due to the way his quirk tore open his arm. All Might gasped, then took a deep breath before saying, Thank you. Whack. All Might then grabbed his head after being struck by the nurse's cane again. What was that for? Recovery Girl responded to Toshinori while shaking her cane at him. I told you to be careful with the boy. Recovery Girl replied. Toshinori sighed to himself, then said, It was the only solution I could come up with at the time. I needed to stop him before things got even more out of hand. Izuku interrupted the conversation by saying, He's right, if it wasn't for All Might I don't think I would have been able to stop myself. The two adults then looked at each other, then back to the boy while smiling. At the same time they said, We're just happy you're okay. Izuku smiled at their words before getting All Might's attention. Toshinori then got closer, gesturing to the green-haired boy to speak. Izuku then spoke. All Might, I had another dream like before, but a different man appeared to me this time. He said his name was Daigoro Banjo and he was the fifth wielder of One for All. All Might sat there in silence as his successor filled him in on every detail he received from one of the vestiges of One for All. After hearing the boy's story, he stood up then proclaimed that he'll gather as much information as possible on all of the previous wielders of his quirk. The two, now having a better understanding of their shared quirk, contemplated what this new information could possibly mean for their future. A month after awakening his new quirk named Black Whip, All Might handed Izuku a notebook filled with all of the intel he put together so far. Izuku took the book from All Might's hands and started glancing over the pages filled with details of all his predecessors. After skimming through most of the pages, he closed the book before stepping up to All Might and saying, I'll learn as much as I can, so I'll know what to do next time a new quirk manifest. All Might just gave him his signature smile before exclaiming, I have the utmost faith in you, young man. Right before giving him a thumbs up, after that he said to the boy, we have about 3 months left before the day of the entrance exam to get you prepared for the practical, so let's see how much control you have on your new quirk. Izuku smiled before activating One for All, then extending both of his arms away from his body. With far greater control than his first time, 2 black rope-like tendrils exited his arms. He then looked at All Might as he was changing into his muscle form before saying, bring it on, All Might. The two then dashed toward each other, clashing like they had several times before. This routine repeated itself every day until the morning of the test. Present day, back to the entrance exam. Izuku is currently lifting up the young girl he just rescued from the 2-pointer robots who tried attacking her. Using Black Whip, he pulled her up to the roof where he was standing out of reach of the chaos below. Setting her down with ease, he asked her, are you okay? The girl, still in shock, just nodded. He then said, I'll be right back. Izuku then leaped into the air above all of the robots in the alley below before yelling out, Detroit Smash! Landing in the center of the mechanical targets, his attack caused a shock wave that radiated from its center, causing all of the robots to smash into their surroundings, destroying them in the process. After completing the task, Izuku leaped back up to the roof where the girl sat and stared with amazement. He then grabbed her by the waist, then jumped back to the ground. Making sure that she was fine, he asked the girl for her name. The girl, still kind of thrown off by what she just witnessed, finally answered, oh yes, sorry, I'm Akira Yamamoto. Izuku responded with a bright and warm smile. Nice to meet you, I'm Izuku Midoriya. I'm glad was able to help, and I hope to see you in UA one day. Izuku's words echoed throughout the alley as he ran off while waving back at the girl, who stood there for a little while before remembering where she was. Venturing back into the street of the exam city, Izuku stumbled across some unscathed robots in the distance. As he started moving forward, he heard a loud crash coming from his right. He quickly got out of the way and glanced at the cause of the noise. He found himself being blocked off by 10 3-pointer robots who just crashed through the building. Izuku charged forward and jumped into the air, activating Black Whip. With his quirk, he grabbed 2 nearby parked cars, lifting them up into the air before slamming them into the 3-point robots. Debris and robot parts flew back into the direction where they had just come from. After landing back on the ground, Izuku then started scouting the area, looking for more foe villains to destroy. Then out of nowhere, the ground started to shake. The city was trembling from the rumble of the approaching mechanical behemoth. Izuku, noticing the towering monstrosity making its way in his direction, thought to himself, so that must be the 0-pointer that Present Mike told us we should avoid during the exam. Looking at the other participants all fleeing in the opposite direction, Izuku thought about following the others until he heard someone call out as if they were in pain. Ooh. He then looked in the direction of where that voice came from. When he spotted the same brown-haired girl, he noticed back at the entrance of the testing site. Realizing that her leg was trapped, and she couldn't escape, Izuku sprang into action. Seeing the blue-haired boy with glasses who he saw earlier was still nearby, Izuku picked up a piece of rebar and threw it into the ground, blocking the boy's path to get his attention. The boy then looked in the direction where the obstruction came from and saw the green-haired boy who was muttering to himself earlier. Izuku then screamed to the boy, "She needs our help." Looking in the direction where he just came from, he saw where the boy was headed and who he was talking about. Wanting to become a hero just like his older brother, Ida took off running towards the trapped girl. Izuku, activating Black Whip, started grabbing large chunks of debris, cars and anything else he could use to block the path of the 0-pointer that was still approaching. This distraction created an opening long enough for Ida to rescue the girl and free her from the fallen debris. Izuku then stumbled across a large boulder that was in the middle of the road. Formulating an idea, Izuku knew that it would take a lot more power than what he'd been using to pull off his plan. Izuku then charged up One for All to his current threshold of 40% and darted at the boulder with his leg cocked back, then screamed out, "St. Louis Smash!" His foot made contact with the boulder, sending it flying directly towards the robot's head. When the boulder collided with the machine, it obliterated all traces of its head clean off its shoulders, subsequently causing its movements to cease. Once the large robot stopped moving, Izuku looked back to see the blue-haired boy carrying the girl away to safety. Now that everyone was clear, Izuku then started looking for more robots to destroy. He activated one for all and took off running. He spotted another two-pointer and then launched a Delaware smash in its direction, destroying the foe villain. Once the robot shattered into pieces, 3 more robots appeared in its place. Raring to go for another round, Izuku cocked back his fist, preparing for another attack, when Present Mike came through on the loudspeaker shouting, "Time is up." Izuku then stopped dead in his tracks, inches from coming in contact with the now deactivated robots. Doing the calculation in his head, Izuku added up all of his villain points and came up with a total of 120. Figuring it should be enough to pass, Izuku made his way back to the entrance of the exam site. Now that the test was over, Izuku started thinking about every new quirk he encountered on his walk back, not noticing all the other contestants staring at him for the amazing feat he had accomplished. Back in the monitor room, all of the heroes took notice of a certain green-haired boy who was able to stop a zero-pointer by himself. Shouta Aizawa, the pro hero Eraserhead, was very intrigued with the boy, who happened to be topic of discussion. Looking over the applicant's form, he read to himself, Izuku Midoriya. Age 15. Quirk, Power Core. Abilities, able to manipulate the power of his quirk and manifest it in different ways. Aizawa then said to himself, "So that explains it, although there's something off about this kid." 1 week later. After arriving to the front steps of his home from school for the day, Izuku was met by his mother at the entrance of his doorway. "Izuku, Izuku, it's here!" his mother shouted as her son made his way into the house. His eyes lit up from excitement, especially since he hadn't heard from All Might since the day of the entrance exam. Izuku tore open the letter and out popped a shiny metal disc that rolled onto the floor. After bouncing off of the wall, the disc projected a video image of All Might. The Midoriyas gasped before saying the pro's name. Izuku then picked up the disc before setting it on a nearby table. The projection of All Might then started to talk. Hey, congratulations young Midoriya, I know you're probably wondering what I'm doing here presenting your test results, but the truth is I've decided to become a teacher this year at UA. So let me start off by saying congratulations on acing the written portion of the exam. All Might will then go on to explain how Izuku set a new record, surpassing even his own score from back when he took the exam himself, with Izuku's score being a whopping 180 points in total. Tears would then stream down the boy's face as he just took another step in the right direction of achieving his dream of becoming a hero. Shortly afterwards, the green-haired teen would leave out of his house and sprint down to his favorite dessert shop to grab an after-dinner treat for his mother and himself in celebration of getting accepted into the hero program. After making his purchase at the dessert shop, Izuku waved to the owner, Mr. Kobayashi, as he left the store. Beginning his trip back home, he heard what sounded like cries coming from a nearby alley. Wanting to see if someone needed help, he headed down the narrow walkway to find the source of the noise. As he got closer, he noticed a knife-wielding blonde girl walking towards an unconscious man. He then yelled out to her, "Stop! What are you doing?" The girl turned to see where the voice came from, but when Izuku locked eyes with the girl, all he saw was a venomous surge bulging from her golden irises. The girl then dashed towards Izuku, but he activated full call, quickly dodging the girl's attack and putting her in a grapple hold. The blonde would struggle for dear life like a rabid dog trying its best to chomp its next victim. But the boy was in full control of all of the girl's movements. He tried his best to calm her down, but all he could hear was her screaming, "Blood, blood, I need his blood, give me blood, stop getting in my way. I need it, I need it, I need it. Let me go, let me go." The girl salivated as she spoke while flailing harder and harder trying to break the hold, but Izuku used 30% to keep her in place due to her strength and her apparent endurance. Izuku looked back at the unconscious man, then back over to the girl. Thinking of what could possibly help, he then raised his sleeve and stuck his arm in front of the girl's mouth. "Here, take my blood." Izuku shouted his words in order to get the girl's attention while she was still kicking and screaming. She turned her head, then launched at the boy's arm, sinking her teeth directly into his flesh. Once her teeth made contact, Izuku felt a very sharp pain, but then noticed it got very quiet as the girl took in his blood. Izuku then thought to himself, I don't know if this is a side effect of her quirk, but something is causing her insatiable behavior, and blood is the key in order for this frenzy to be stopped. The pain of her bite faded and Izuku looked down to see that the girl was completely calm. She then quietly said, "Thank you." But before he could reply, she jumped back and leaped up on a nearby canopy. She started to climb up the catwalk above her when she heard the boy shout, "You don't have to hurt people, I can help you out if that's what you need." The girl stopped, then turned her head towards the green-haired boy without saying a word. Seeing this, Izuku took that as sign of having her attention. "You see, I'm going to be a hero, so helping people comes naturally to me, and I believe you're someone who needs help. So please, let me help you." The girl paused for a second as the words echoed throughout her head. Izuku, thinking that he might have gotten through to the blonde girl, was then startled by the noise of the man who was attacked earlier waking up. He grunted in pain from the blow he received to the back of his head. Izuku then hurried to the man's side. Once there, he looked back up to see that the girl was now gone and nowhere to be found. A little while after calling the authorities, the police arrived and took the statement from the boy as the ambulance took the injured man to the hospital. Izuku then told the police that the man was attacked by someone, and when he came to check it out, he must have scared whoever it was off. Finishing up their report, the police offered Izuku a ride home and praised him for doing the right thing by staying with the man until help arrived. As the car made its way to the home of the Midoriyas, Izuku couldn't help but think about who that girl was and where she went. Judging from how she was dressed and how young she was, I doubt she could be homeless, but what really concerned him was how she acted before she was able to drink his blood. Dangerous urges like that can definitely become fatal if nothing is done about it. I'll have to find a way to help, but in order for that to happen, I'll need to locate her first. End of chapter 2. Thanks for watching my video, and if you enjoyed it, please subscribe. Let me know what you think about my story in the comments section below. Until next time, I'm Mahala at y'all.